It never crossed my mind that I would share this, yet life has a peculiar knack for leading us into the unforeseen. Diana is my name, and I find myself at the age of 44. For quite some time now, I have embraced the journey of being a single mother. I am raising my son, Noah, who is now 22 years old, all on my own. Our bond has always been strong, a steadfast partnership navigating the twists and turns of life together. On a night like no other, an unforeseen event unfolded. Noah appeared utterly exhausted and confessed that he was not feeling well. He had been toiling diligently and immersing himself in his studies as he gazed outward. An unforeseen event transpired. Relayed, he could rest on my bed for a bit. Should he desire to rest, the night in our home was particularly chilly, and it required some time to become warm. I draped a thick blanket over him. Initially, it appeared to be an ordinary scene, a mother assisting her son. As I reclined beside him, I sensed him inching nearer. He must have been seeking warmth, and I didn't dwell on it much. Yet in that moment, he enveloped me in his embrace, drawing me near as he once did in his youth. Though taken aback, I chose to let it pass. It is likely that I simply sought solace. His warmth enveloped me, accompanied by the rhythm of his steady breathing. As we lay there, I sensed Noah's breathing gradually ease, as if he were drifting into slumber. The silence enveloped the room, allowing the rhythmic thump of my heartbeat to echo in the stillness. It was an odd sensation, yet it brought a sense of tranquility. I remained still, reluctant to intrude upon his moment, convincing myself it was merely a mother offering solace to her child. Yet as time passed, he shifted once more, drawing even nearer to me beneath the blanket. His arm tightened around me, and for a fleeting moment, I found myself frozen in place, uncertain about my thoughts. A part of me yearned to utter words that would create distance. Yet, a different part of me remained motionless. A palpable tension hung in the air, an unshakable presence that I couldn't quite comprehend, leaving me to ponder the source of my unease. Then an unexpected event unfolded before me. As I shifted beneath the blanket, my fingers brushed against something solid and unyielding. It caught me off guard, and I could feel my heart begin to race. I made an effort to maintain my composure, reminding myself that he was merely my child. Perhaps he was unaware of it, even within the depths of his own mind. I reclined, attempting to dismiss the emotions that began to swell within me. I reassured myself that it was merely a fleeting instance, an odd and uncomfortable moment that would soon fade away. Yet, as the moments slipped away, it dawned on me that the situation had shifted, leaving me uncertain about how to navigate it. Noah remained near, his breath even, yet I sensed the warmth between us intensifying. I longed to utter something cheerful to ease the heaviness in the air, yet the words eluded me. In that moment, I found myself ensnared, grappling with the uncertainty of my own emotions. Then Noah adjusted his position, raising his head to gaze upon me. His gaze possessed a gentle warmth. I then caught a glimpse of Noah's expression, one I hadn't encountered before, that evoked a curious blend of safety and unease within me. Though he remained silent, his eyes conveyed a silent inquiry, as if seeking reassurance that all was well. I attempted a smile, wishing it might alleviate the peculiar sensation, yet it only deepened the silence around me. Noah's hands rested on my arm, warm and gentle, unwavering. His fingertips brushed against me, a gentle, almost absent-minded caress. It was a seemingly insignificant detail, yet each touch ignited a spark, an undeniable force within me that demanded attention. I maintained a calm breath, striving to conceal the rapid thrum of my heart from his gaze. Uncertainty enveloped me, leaving me at a loss for words and actions. There I lay, enveloped in the peculiar bond that seemed to bind us together. In my mind, I reassured myself that this was merely a mother offering solace to her son, nothing beyond that. Yet in that stillness, with only the two of us cocooned beneath the blanket, my thoughts whirled relentlessly, each one a disquieting whisper I couldn't seem to dispel. He was known as M. Yet, as I lay there beside him, the proximity stirred something within me. A profound connection, an intimacy. I found myself perplexed. A blend of confusion and warmth enveloped me, an unforeseen sensation that rendered me motionless. Noah appeared oblivious to the turmoil I was experiencing. He lingered by my side, his hand gliding gently, a soothing presence as if it were the most instinctive act imaginable. His breath flowed steadily, a tranquil rhythm in the stillness. His eyes fluttered shut once more, and I found myself pondering whether he was drifting off into slumber. Yet his hand began to shift, gliding gently up my arm. A shiver coursed through me as he opened his eyes, locking his gaze onto mine. Once upon a question lingered in his gaze, as though he were silently inquiring whether I too experienced the same peculiar pull he felt. I murmured his name, struggling to form the syllables. I wished to put an end to this as well. He leaned in closer, then pulled away, creating some distance. Yet, for some reason, I found myself unable to stir. The air crackled with an undeniable tension between us. A subtle tempest gathering in the stillness. Silence enveloped us, yet the atmosphere thrummed with the weight of unvoiced thoughts. Emotions that Webb experienced yet found difficult to articulate at the time, as if it were the most instinctive response. He inclined forward, nearer. My heart raced, a wild drumbeat in my chest, while my thoughts surged like a tempest, yet I found myself unable to retreat. I found myself in a conflict, caught between my responsibilities as his mother and the unsettling emotions that had emerged. As he leaned in, my breath hitched, and all my thoughts dissolved, leaving only that singular moment suspended in time. Noah's hand lay softly upon my shoulder, a quiet connection between us. In that moment, his fingers hovered, suggesting a shared uncertainty. The world beyond seemed a mere blur, and my attention was wholly consumed by the comforting warmth of his presence, the rhythmic pulse of his heart that I could nearly perceive. In that fleeting instant, I shut my eyes, seeking to find a semblance of tranquility within. I urged myself to retreat, to sever the intimacy that enveloped me in a haze of confusion and intensity. Yet, in that moment, I sensed his hand softly glide upward, tenderly sweeping a lock of hair aside from my face. It was a gesture so simple and filled with care, yet it stirred my heart in ways that eluded my comprehension. I opened my eyes, and there he stood, gazing at me with a tenderness that spoke of deep trust. His face hovered near, allowing me to observe every minute detail, the minuscule, the delicate constellation of freckles, the soft arc of his lips, the way his gaze sought out my own. In his gaze, I found a vulnerability that mirrored my own. In that moment, I could sense that he was just as adrift as I was, caught in a stillness that felt as though time had come to a halt, leaving my thoughts in a suspended state. It was a tempest of inquiries, a cacophony of uncertainty, a myriad of thoughts that eluded comprehension, yet my body remained still. A compelling connection tugged at me, this individual I had nurtured into existence. And yet, in that moment, he seemed like a stranger reborn, just as I. We imagined we would remain suspended in that silence for all eternity. Noah withdrew a fraction, shattering the spell that had enveloped them. He averted his gaze, a hint of embarrassment flickering across his features, and released a nervous chuckle while rubbing the back of his neck. It transported me to a moment, illuminating the depth of our connection and the richness of what we had experienced together. In an instant, the burden of it all descended upon me. I inhaled deeply, seeking to ground myself amidst the tidal wave of feelings that threatened to engulf me from all sides. I fervently wished that he remained oblivious to the inner turmoil that churned within me. "Sorry, Mom," he murmured, his voice soft and tentative, a hint of uncertainty woven through his words. Escaped me. The silence stretched between us, thick and palpable, as I wrestled with my own tumultuous emotions. His avoidance of eye contact only deepened the tension, and I could sense the unspoken words lingering in the air, heavy with unacknowledged truths. I yearned to bridge the gap, to dissolve the unease that had settled like a fog, yet I remained paralyzed, caught in the web of my own hesitation. Wouldn't come. I found myself frozen, unsure of how to break the silence. In that fleeting moment, a startling clarity washed over me. I had never felt more out of place. With my own son, I reached out. Instinctively, my hand rested gently on his shoulder, hoping that this small gesture would offer him some reassurance. A quiet smile tugged at the corners of my lips as I endeavored to ease the tension, even as my own anxiety threaded through my words. "It's all right, Noah," I murmured, my voice soft and steady in an attempt to reassure him. It's just been the two of us for so long, hasn't it? We've grown accustomed to it, and now it feels a bit strange." He nodded in understanding, and I noticed a flicker of relief pass through his eyes, as if my words had struck a chord just as the atmosphere began to lighten. The doorbell rang, shattering the fragile calm we had just begun to build. The sharp sound jolted us both out of the moment, reminding us of the world beyond that door where I stood. Quickly, my heart still racing from the exchange, feeling an odd sense of gratitude for the interruption. As I made my way to the door, I noticed my pulse quicken, and I couldn't shake the strange lingering energy that remained from the conversation with Noah. When I opened the door, I found our neighbor David standing on the other side. He was smiling, his familiar face, offering an instant sense of comfort. Though I could tell his eyes lingered on me a moment longer than usual, as if searching for something unspoken. Something stirred beneath the surface as I quickly composed myself, wishing to conceal the remnants of earlier tension from him. "Hey, Diana." David. His voice greeted me warmly, as friendly and easygoing as ever. "I thought I'd come by and check if you needed anything. I know it's been getting a bit colder lately, and I can help with any heating issues. If you've been having problems." His thoughtfulness was a soothing balm, and an unexpected wave of gratitude washed over me, if only for a fleeting moment. In that moment, I allowed the warmth of David's presence to wash over the lingering shadows of Eunice. "Oh, thank you, David," I said, offering him a smile that felt more authentic. "The house does have a tendency to grow a bit cold, particularly at night, and your assistance would mean a lot to me." David stepped inside, his footsteps steady and reassuring, and I sensed Noah's gaze upon us from the periphery. His expression was inscrutable, yet there was something in the way he observed us that stirred a sense of unease within me. Stomach tightened for a brief moment. I could have sworn I saw something akin to jealousy in his eyes, though he quickly masked his features, returning to their usual indifference. The look caught me off guard, leaving me with an uneasy sense that perhaps Noah was feeling something more complicated than I had realized. As David moved around the living room, checking the heater, he made small talk, inquiring about how things had been at home, how I was managing with everything. His voice was light, and her presence enveloped me in a warmth I hadn't anticipated. Yet, my gaze continually returned to Noah, who lingered in the hallway, observing us with a silent intensity that charged the air with an unarticulated energy. The atmosphere in the room had subtly transformed, leaving me caught in a delicate balance between welcoming David and alleviating the unease that lingered. I could sense a shift in Noah, as if an unspoken rivalry was brewing between them for my attention, and I found myself at a loss to comprehend the intricate dynamics at play. I stole another glance at Noah, and for a brief moment, a glimmer in his eyes suggested an unspoken turmoil, emotions he had yet to reveal. But before I could decipher that fleeting connection, David redirected my attention, his face lighting up with a reassuring smile. "All right. Everything looks good here," he said, his tone inviting. "Diana, just call if you need any more help." I expressed my gratitude to Noah, and as David exited, I could sense the tension between Noah and me intensifying, thickening the air and complicating everything further. I quietly closed the door behind me. Turned only to discover Noah standing rigidly in the hallway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was serious, his gaze unwavering, and there was an unmistakable quality to his posture that signaled our unresolved conflict. "Are you okay, Noah?" I inquired, my tone gentle yet probing, striving to comprehend the chasm between us. The thoughts into words, the silence stretched uncomfortably between us. I yearned to unravel the mystery of his thoughts, to bridge the widening chasm that separated us with each fleeting second. He offered a slight, almost indifferent shrug, his voice a mere whisper as he said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just didn't expect David to show up. That's all." His words lingered, yet they failed to illuminate the deeper currents swirling just out of reach. I felt an urge to reach out, to probe further, to grasp why this moment felt so profoundly altered. But before I could articulate my questions, another question lingered in the air as he turned and walked past me, heading toward his room without a glance in my direction. The silence that enveloped us was deafening, and the soft click of the door closing behind him felt like the final seal on a conversation that had barely even begun. I stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by an odd mixture of relief, confusion, and an unsettling sense that something important had been left unsaid. My gaze remained fixed on the closed door to Noah's room, my heart laden with an overwhelming sense of loss. Words eluded me, as if a shift had occurred between us, an unvoiced tension lingering in the atmosphere like a storm cloud poised to unleash its fury. My mind replayed the moments of our earlier closeness, the way his gaze had lingered when David was present, the palpable tension simmering just beneath the surface, ready to erupt. I retreated to my room, sinking onto the edge of the bed, my thoughts racing as I struggled to make sense of it all. Everything that had just transpired weighed heavily on my mind. I understood that I couldn't evade it indefinitely. Eventually, we would have to confront the shifting dynamics between us. Yet, I found myself at a loss, unsure of how to unravel this intricate web of emotions. As I spiraled deeper into my thoughts, a gentle knock echoed through the stillness of my room. My heart raced, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Perhaps it was Noah, returning to engage in conversation. I called out, my voice steadier than my inner turmoil, as the door creaked open. And there he stood, standing in the doorway. His expression was a puzzle I had come to know intimately. He stepped inside and settled beside me on the bed, hands folded in his lap, gaze cast downward. The silence enveloped us, thick and heavy, as if the weight of all that remained unspoken was almost unbearable. The moment felt suffocating yet somehow essential. At last, Noah shattered the stillness, his voice a mere whisper. "Mom," he began, each word chosen with a delicate caution. "I'm not quite sure what's happening. I apologize if I made things uncomfortable earlier." He trailed off, his words caught in his throat, frustration evident as he grappled with emotions he couldn't quite articulate. I reached out, placing my hand on his in a gesture of quiet reassurance, a gentle squeeze that conveyed more than words ever could. "Noah, it's okay," I said softly, my voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within me. Maybe we're both feeling a little lost right now. It has been just the two of us for so long, and at times, the complexities of our situation become overwhelming. It's perfectly natural to feel a sense of confusion." He spoke slowly, his eyes still fixed on his hands, a distant look clouding his expression. Within those depths, there was a weight to his gaze, a profound emotion that tugged at my heart. After what felt like an eternity, he finally raised his eyes to meet mine. His expression was a tapestry of emotions, uncertainty, frustration, longing, and something else entirely, an unfamiliar sensation that lingered in the air. It was more than just the usual, frustration mingled with confusion, yet beneath it all lay something deeper, something raw and unspoken. I found myself at a loss for words, my response barely a whisper, almost lost in the air. It felt as though he feared the truth, hesitant to face the tension that had been quietly escalating between us. The vulnerability in his voice struck me with unexpected force, illuminating the depth of his struggle. In that moment, clarity washed over me. I realized just how profoundly this turmoil was impacting him as well. The ache in my heart resonated with the uncertainty reflected in his eyes. For a fleeting moment, the desire to reach out and embrace him enveloped me. I longed to encircle him in my arms, to whisper that everything would be all right, to assure him that we could traverse this tumultuous path together. Yet I paused, uncertain if my gesture would genuinely provide solace or merely entangle us further. His needs were shrouded in ambiguity, and I questioned whether my instinct to offer comfort was indeed the appropriate response. Thus, I chose to remain, letting the profound silence between us resonate more powerfully than any words could convey. I could feel the weight of unspoken tension enveloping us as I sat there, waiting for the right moment to shatter the stillness. After what seemed like an eternity, I inhaled deeply, centering myself, and turned to meet his gaze. I searched his eyes for any hint of his emotions, any indication of what he might need from me. "Noah," I began, my voice soft, "maybe we just need to take a step back and truly reflect on everything." I aimed to strike the delicate balance between reassurance and understanding. It's okay to feel a connection, yet it's perfectly acceptable to crave solitude for reflection. Thoughts? We need not have all the answers, do we? In this very moment, he nodded slowly, as if absorbing the gravity of my words. Then, in a surprising gesture that startled me, he rested his head on my shoulder. It was a movement that instantly transported me to his younger days, when he would frequently seek solace in that familiar manner. It felt warm, comforting, and yet there was something distinctly altered in the air. A palpable tension simmered just beneath the surface, impossible to overlook. An unspoken acknowledgement hung between us, hinting at changes we had yet to fully grasp. My heart responded instinctively to his presence, and before I realized it, I had wrapped my arm around him, drawing him near in a gesture that felt both protective and soothing. It was an embrace that promised safety, even as the unanswered questions loomed large between us. So much remained unvoiced, a whirlwind of emotions swirling around us. I hadn't fully processed everything yet, but in that moment, I came to understand that perhaps we didn't require all the answers immediately. We could navigate this journey step by step, unraveling it together. Even as the road ahead appeared uncertain and intricate, sitting there, holding onto one another, a sense of quiet calm enveloped me. A gentle, unspoken hope lingered in the air, assuring us that regardless of the challenges we faced, no matter how daunting they might appear, we could still find our way through this together. We remained, for a time, enveloped in quietude. The intimacy shared between us provided a transient sense of tranquility. It seemed as if the chaos and intricacies of our circumstances could vanish merely by our proximity. Yet, I understood instinctively that it was not so straightforward. The solace found in his company was unmistakable. However, beneath that warmth lay a current of discomfort, a sensation neither of us could entirely dispel. Eventually, Noah leaned back a fraction, raising his head to meet. My gaze met his, and the serious intensity of his expression shifted the comfort of the moment, transforming it into something weighty. "I don't know what to do with all these feelings," he said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't want to complicate our relationship, yet I can't simply turn a blind eye to it." His words hung in the atmosphere, heavy with unspoken tension, resembling a question he lacked the bravery to articulate. The burden of his silence bore down on me, and I swallowed hard, my thoughts spiraling in chaotic loops. In my frantic search for the perfect words, I parted my lips, yet before I could utter a sound, another knock echoed through the air. We both jumped at the sudden noise, caught off guard by the interruption, our gazes meeting in a moment of surprise and uncertainty. The knock resonated with a certain gravity, purposeful and insistent, as though the individual on the other side recognized an unsettling presence that demanded to be confronted. Whatever lingered between us, a surge of anxious energy enveloped me, and before I could contemplate, I acted. I rose from my seat and made my way to the door, pulling it open with a deliberate motion. David stood there once more, his expression shadowed by concern as if he were burdened by a weighty thought. "Menace," he uttered, his voice tinged with authentic worry. "I apologize for intruding. I merely wished to ascertain that all was well. You appeared somewhat unsettled earlier, and I wanted to ensure your well-being." For a fleeting moment, I hesitated, casting a glance back at Noah. He observed us intently, his expression a mystery. The air between us crackled with unvoiced inquiries. I inhaled deeply. Taking a breath, I attempted to steady my voice, though it quivered slightly as I replied. "Thanks, David. But we're fine. Just enjoying a quiet evening." David scrutinized me with a long, searching look before shifting his attention to Noah. His gaze lingered on him, thoughtful and probing. When he returned to me, he nodded slowly, yet something in his demeanor hinted that he wasn't entirely convinced. "All softening, right?" he said, his tone gentle. "Just remember, I'm next door if you need anything. Don't hesitate." As he turned and walked away, I closed the door with a soft click, leaning against it for a moment. I gathered my thoughts, turning back to Noah, who remained there, observing me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His gaze seemed to penetrate deep, searching for something, perhaps the truth or a sense of reassurance. After a long pause, he rose, his movements slow and deliberate, causing my heart to quicken. Once more, the air between us felt thick and heavy with unspoken words, laden with all the things we dared not voice. He moved. As he drew nearer, I steeled myself for the words that were about to escape his lips. Yet, when he finally stood before me, he halted, his expression transforming as if he were engaged in a fierce internal conflict. Perhaps we ought to tread lightly on this, Mom," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, quivering with uncertainty. "Just a little. Perhaps we require some time to reflect." His words washed over me like a tide, and I nodded, my own heart heavy with the same tumultuous feelings he must have been experiencing. I recognized the necessity for distance, for a moment to unravel our thoughts. "You're right, Noah, My voice came out soft and sly, heavy with the weight of all that remained unspoken. We both understood the need for contemplation. This was not a moment to rush. Noah nodded in silent accord, and we lingered in the stillness. Our closeness was a curious blend of intimacy and distance, as if we teetered on the edge of an unknown precipice. It felt like an ending, yet also the dawn of something new, something that eluded our definitions. As he moved slowly toward his room, I found myself anchored in place, pondering what the future might hold for us. As we ponder the path ahead, whether in unity or solitude, I extend my gratitude for your presence until the very end. Before we part ways, I encourage you to consider subscribing if you haven't already. Your support, no matter how modest it may seem, holds immense significance for us and fuels our passion for crafting heartfelt content. If today's offerings resonated with you, please show your appreciation with a like. Each interaction nurtures our growth and strengthens our bond as we share stories that truly matter. Thank you for being an integral part of this community. See,